comfort level. Vaccinated, boosted, very, very glad to be here with you today with all of our guests. This is Valentine's Day. This is a day that we want to be celebrating love, entrusting intimate relationships. We are here today because there are so many who break the trust of those relationships, who choose to use power and control and violence over their partners. We're here today because there are Chicagoans who today will be choked by their partners. There are Chicagoans today who will have guns placed on their bedside or may have those guns placed next to their heads. This is our Chicago, and we use hard, ugly words about this because gender-based and domestic violence is a hard, ugly issue impacting the lives of tens of thousands of Chicagoans, many for whom their home is the least safe place for them. But I am glad that we are here today. I am glad that the network called out to us with these issues. I am so glad that our council, that our mayor, that our commissioner heard these voices, and I am glad to talk today about the urgent and overdue investments in this budget that are going to make the lives of tens of thousands safer in this city. Thank you. Madam Mayor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Alderman, for your passionate and stirring words. We're here to address the rise in domestic violence-related incidents that have been occurring in our city throughout the pandemic, and to remind domestic violence survivors, people who are themselves right this moment feeling vulnerable and under siege, that we are here for them, that there is a way in which they can get out of their current circumstances. In addition to Alderman LaSpada, joining me here today is DFSS Commissioner Brandy Kanazi, CDPH's Director in the Office of Violence Prevention and Behavioral Health, Erica Davis, and our partners, the network, the Metropolitan Family Services and Heartland Alliance. Today is a day after Super Bowl, typically, unfortunately, a day in which domestic violence hotlines report seeing an uptick in calls. Today is also Valentine's Day, a day that should be dedicated to celebrating the love that we have one with another. But for too many of our residents, as the Alderman said, this is just another day of living in fear. Every person, no matter their circumstances or how they identify, deserves to feel and the reality of being respected, loved, and safe in their own homes. We've intentionally gathered here today so that our residents who are trapped in abusive relationships won't feel alone and are aware of the hotline and other services designed to help them get themselves out of this difficult circumstances with the assistance of a network of care. Addressing violence in our city in all of its manifestations is my priority. In regard to domestic violence, it's not lost on me that women, and more specifically, Black women and women of color, have borne the brunt of this crisis. More often than not, acts of gender-based violence are both spurred and deepened by existing systemic inequities, including disinvestment, poverty, a chronic lack of services, and more. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, many of our systems simply frayed and fragmented, leading to an increase in community violence and gender-based violence, not only in our city, sadly, but also across the entire country, and particularly in low-income communities of color. To demonstrate how sharply domestic violence rose as a result of the pandemic, let me share with you a few data points. On average, the Chicago Police Department receives over 230,000 calls for help each year. That's a staggering number. The Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, operated by the network, and partially funded by DFSS, saw a 16% increase in call volume from 2019 to 2020. And similarly saw 2020 as a 96% increase in domestic violence homicides over 2019. Though calls and homicides seem to be trending backwards towards pre-COVID levels, which is a good thing, we are still, frankly, at a crisis level. Domestic violence-related non-fatal shootings and violations of protective orders to continue to escalate in 2021. So far this year, we're seeing a 400% increase in DV-related non-fatal shootings compared to the same period in 2021. We can't say this enough, that we must rise up as a community to address this part of our public and community safety challenge. So to say I'm concerned is an understatement. In addition to directly impacting survivors, domestic violence, as we all know, is corrosive to families and communities. We know that violence begets violence. Too many of our young people are growing up in homes where they are firsthand experiencing and witnessing violence. Then within their own communities, they continue to see and experience violence. It's no surprise then that the community areas where we see high rates of domestic violence mirror the same communities where we see high rates of gun violence and other manifestations of poverty and disinvestment. We must comprehensively address gender-based violence and domestic violence with the same sense of urgency and fervor that we address other forms of community violence. To properly address this issue, we can no longer hide behind fragmented systems or silos or limitations in funding. We need to name the intersectionality of racism and gender inequities and acknowledge the lived experience of women and members of the LGBTQ+ community who are also experience high rates of domestic violence. That is why last year, at my direction, our administration led a collaborative effort to co-design the first of its kind strategy, a strategic plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking. This work began with the launch of the Gender-Based Violence Advisory Council, who led a robust and inclusive community engagement process. This group engaged leaders, survivors, city officials to properly address the lived experiences and needs of those most affected by these issues throughout our entire city. The city's first ever strategic plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking strives to first and foremost build the muscle across city government to understand how these victimizations can happen, so that we may equip all facets of government, from our health department to DFSS to even the Department of Housing, to adequately respond and connect survivors and families to critical services. These services are supported by $25 million in new investments, nearly 3 times the previous budget for domestic violence as part of our Chicago Recovery Plan. And I want to emphasize this. It is part of our Chicago Recovery Plan. As I've said many times, this isn't just about economics. It's about making sure that we understand the pain and the problems and the struggles that people are experiencing in their communities every single day. Because if we don't do that, we cannot fully and adequately recover from all the pandemic-induced challenges that we've seen in our community. These investments increase the number of rapid rehousing units for survivors fleeing violence, ensure survivors have access to a free attorney to represent them in civil or criminal court, and provide financial assistance that could literally quantify safety for a parent or their children. Also, for the first time, these resources target young people who have experienced or witnessed violence in their own homes. Because the research is clear, trauma without intervention leads to negative, harmful outcomes for the individual, the families in our communities. These funds are these funds are a sign of our commitment to addressing this issue head on. And I'm proud of the collaborative efforts that have created these supports. As the first large city to take on this comprehensive approach to gender-based violence and human trafficking, I knew it was necessary to put the proper leadership in place to get it right. And that's why we now have a director of gender-based violence strategy and policy in our office, Darcy Flynn, who consults with us every single day, provides support to the police department and all of our agencies who themselves are struggling with this issue, but also working hard to be diligent in delivering services to those in need. And thank you, Darcy, for all of your diligent work. This work requires an all-hands-on-deck approach, and the leadership in place will continue to coordinate efforts and build the muscle necessary to create a strong safety net for survivors and their loved ones. And as we continue providing direct services, we're also making investments that address the root causes of violence in our community. And let me share some details there as well. The Chicago Recovery Plan will also include $1.2 billion in investments that will create thriving and safe communities. And thanks again to the City Council for agreeing with us that these funds were necessary to build a better, more equitable, and safer Chicago. These include $157 million to aid families, $108 million to support the health and wellness of residents, and tripling of mental health investments for a total of $86 million investment in mental health equity. The list goes on, but I hope you understand the seriousness with which we take these issues. We're putting our money where our mouth is, but particularly we are walking our values every single day to make sure that we address these issues. And before I close, I want to echo the call of advocates who are here today and others fighting this fight, who are asking for more funds from all levels of government to be allocated to these life-saving services. I also want to applaud the Federal Senate Judiciary Committee for finally introducing bipartisan legislation to reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act that will make a huge difference in our efforts here locally. I stand ready to partner and collaborate with our friends in philanthropy and the private sector to also continue to address this crisis. And finally, I want to speak directly to those who are themselves right now experiencing gender-based violence. It doesn't matter your background, your education, your income, or your race. You know that. From Lincoln Park to Lincoln Square, Rogers Park to Humboldt Park, South Lawndale or South Shore, I want you to understand that there's help at the ready for you. Please call the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-877-863-6338. Let me repeat that. This is the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-877-863-6338. Don't go through this alone. It's hard, it's challenging, but reach out. There's somebody on the other end of that phone that wants to help you, that wants to support you, that understands what your pain is and how afraid you may be. But please find the courage in yourself to reach out. That's 1-877-863-6338. I also want to acknowledge two representatives that are here that also are part of this fight. And that's Chief Nieves Navales, who is here from the Chicago Police Department. The police department also has to be an important partner in this work. And I think they understand that. And Chief Navales and his team are working diligently. We can't be in this fight alone if a critical partner who comes into contact on a daily basis with people in need doesn't understand, hasn't gone through the training, and they have and are committed. So thank you, Chief Navales. I also want to recognize Andrea Kirsten from COPA, who's housed also in this building many times when they get a call for help It's a call about a range of different issues, and so COPA's role in this fight is equally important. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here, but importantly, for your commitment. And with that, I will call up Commissioner Brandy Kanazi of DFS, who plays such a critical role, personally cares about these issues, but her team is united in making sure that we rise up to meet the challenge of this increase in cases with sympathy, with support, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to help victims and survivors. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor Lightfoot, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Brandy Kanazi, and it is my honor to lead the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services as Commissioner. At DFSS, it is our goal to connect households to resources that foster stability, support their well-being, and empower them to thrive. If an individual is experiencing violence, achieving these goals becomes much more difficult. That is why it is so crucial that domestic violence reduction efforts remain a key component of our violence reduction plan and anti-poverty agenda. We remain deeply committed to working with Mayor Lightfoot and the city in developing a whole-of-government approach to address this issue. DFSS's Division on Domestic Violence leads a multi-layered response to intimate partner violence. And now, for the first time, we have expanded that work to gender-based violence services. We fund a network of services providers that engage survivors and provide trauma-informed, culturally competent supports to help them end the cycle of violence. One of those partnerships involves the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, a critical tool for increasing access to life-saving resources for survivors of domestic violence. This service is operated by our long-term partner, the network. Our collaboration on the DV Hotline stretches back into the 1990s and remains an excellent example of city and advocacy agencies like the network in showing how we can be great partners. Today, we are doing more than ever to support survivors and individuals in crisis thanks to Mayor Lightfoot's fierce leadership and dedication to making violence reduction a priority. This year, we are also dedicated to expanding these life-saving services with a $25 million new investment budgeted for survivors of gender-based services. These resources support survivors through legal services, financial assistance, case management, and services for children who have witnessed or experienced violence. The budget also includes $4.2 million to support the rapid rehousing of survivors of domestic violence and gender-based services. Our budget provides these resources necessary to support placement and financial assistance for immediate rehousing, as well as long-term supports to ensure the stabilization and ongoing safety. The unfortunate reality is this. Many people who experience harm through gender-based violence are judged or deemed unworthy because they do not fit the profile of a victim. They are people who look like you, me, and many other individuals who call our great city home. Predominantly women of color who are immigrant and LGBTQ+ communities. Individuals are facing domestic and gender-based violence at disproportionate rates. Domestic violence and gender-based violence is a crisis that thrives in the darkness and ignorance. 1 of 3 women will experience physical violence over their lifetime. Recognizing this crisis in its totality and understanding the facts and knowing what to look for are critical elements as we confront this crisis head on. We will not stop working with service providers, city officials, and community members, as well as other stakeholders to frame this complex and far-reaching conversation with an equity lens and address the crisis head on. Today and every day moving forward, we must recommit ourselves to our shared mission of protecting the well-being of each and every individual in this city. Thank you, Mayor Lightfoot, Alderman LaSpada, and all of our city agencies and service providers for your dedication. I would like now to introduce Amanda Pyron, Executive Director for the network.
Good afternoon. Many thanks to Mayor Lightfoot for holding this press conference to raise awareness about the critical issue of gender-based violence. And many thanks to DFSS Commissioner Brandy Kanazi for hosting this in her wonderful building and for many years of sustained partnership. You and your team provide excellent leadership, and we're very, very grateful for all the work that you've done over the past 2 years and over the past 20 years to get us to this point. As noted, I'm Amanda Pyron, the Executive Director of the Network Advocating Against Domestic Violence. And it can't be stated enough that we're the organization that has been lucky enough to partner with DFSS to operate the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. We applaud Mayor Lightfoot for investing $25 million in new funding for services of survivors of gender-based violence and utilizing the Gender-Based Violence Task Force to ensure that this funding is provided to the community quickly and effectively. This investment in community-based supports is greatly needed. To date, as the mayor noted, domestic violence shootings have risen by 400%, with domestic violence homicides twice that of this time last year. In 2021, 83% of domestic violence shooting victims and 86% of domestic violence homicide victims were Black, with a record number of domestic violence shooting victims under the age of 18. Just last week, the network was contacted by one survivor who was shot by her boyfriend and who continues to be threatened by him after her release from the hospital. No charges have been filed or arrests made. As a resident of public housing, she's unable to transfer to safer housing within the public system or a private, undisclosed location without foregoing her housing altogether. Survivors like this young woman depend on the network for systemic advocacy and on our community partners for safety. Contacts to the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline are already up 19% over this period last year. And that was the year that we received more calls than ever in our history. In addition, this year, the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline has provided 48 free rides for survivors in crisis, compared to only 6 during this period last year. Survivors are reaching out for shelter, safety planning and support, and connections to community resources. Friends and family contact us with questions on how to help loved ones. And we know the need for community-based support is growing. One of our member service providers has a 5-month wait for counseling services, leading a recently referred survivor to receive services in Joliet since no counseling services were available in Chicago. Requests for legal services were up 125% last year, with survivors seeking support for orders of protection and other legal remedies. We look forward to the city announcing an open call for funding for additional legal services for survivors of gender-based violence in the coming weeks. We also look forward to additional investments in housing and continued refinement of the process through which survivors can obtain safe housing, as shelter beds have been full every day this year. And we're grateful that the team at DFSS, many of whom are in attendance, have taken that challenge on and are anxious to see the results. Our Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline staff answer calls, texts, and chat 24 hours a day. And I never travel anywhere alone. I'm so grateful that they're here today to support this effort. We answer these calls and texts and chats in English and Spanish with a language line available for those contacting in other languages. Individuals can call with questions for safety planning and support or referrals to services. This includes people who are causing harm. We answer those calls as well, and you'll hear more about services for them in just a few minutes. People can call more than once, and we know it takes an average of 7 tries before a survivor leaves an abusive relationship for good. We encourage all those in need to listen to the mayor, as good residents do, and call the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline for support, for services, and for safety planning. 1-877-863-6338. One of the many joys of the past 2 years is watching the city of Chicago take a public health approach to domestic violence, in addition to the one city approach. So I'm very happy to introduce Erica Davis from the Chicago Department of Public Health to talk more about that now. Erica?
Hello, everyone. My name is Erica B. Davis, and I've served with the Chicago Department of Public Health for over 20 years. I'm so pleased to promote this initiative that aims to reduce violence through holistic healing and trauma-informed care. The Chicago Department of Public Health's mission is to promote and improve health by engaging residents, communities, and partners in establishing and implementing policies and services that prioritize residents and communities' with the greatest need. Our work is guided by our Community Health Improvement Plan, Healthy Chicago 2025, which focuses on racial and health equity. It seeks to close the 8+ year gap in life expectancy between white and Black residents. We were pleased to work closely with the Mayor's Office of Violence Reduction to release in 2021 this RFP, Expanding Services for People Who Cause Harm. It aligns with our focus on Healthy Chicago 2025's guiding principle of elevating trauma-informed practices and public health safety while integrating the Mayor's Our City, Our Safety plan to reduce violence. We're proud of the level of collaboration across department and community participation in the Gender-Based Violence Advisory Committee that underscore the importance of innovative programming with us. Our goal is to promote an intersectional approach to building safe and equitable communities. This program has 3 objectives. 1, to support integration of services for people who cause harm into overall domestic violence ecosystem and strengthen the coordination of services needed to support children, families, and communities. 2, to expand the accessibility of services that are culturally, linguistically, and contextually responsive to the unique needs of the communities served. And 3, to build capacity in organizations to expand the delivery of evidence-based, evidence-informed, and trauma-informed services to people who cause harm in communities of high need. We look forward to working with Metropolitan Family Services as our delegate, their team of experienced staff, the Mayor's Office, city and community partners, and the People Who Cause Harm evaluation partner, Heartland Alliance, to launch this important program. We have an opportunity to make households safer by reducing intimate partner violence and childhood exposure to violence, and create more responsive systems and accessibility of programs for all Chicagoans. Now I'd like to invite Teresa Nahil, Chief Operating Officer with Metropolitan Family Services, to the podium. Thank you. Teresa?
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Nihil, and as Erica said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Metropolitan Family Services. It's an honor to be here today with Mayor Lightfoot, Alderman LaSpada, Commissioner Kanazi, Amanda, Erica, and all of the rest of you. I know it's already been talked about that today's Valentine's Day. It's a little ironic that we are here today. Many of the victims of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence, and many of the persons who cause this harm have never known the Hallmark movie version of love. In fact, what they've known is trauma and pain and disappointment and hopelessness. Metropolitan Family Services is excited and proud to partner with the Mayor's Office, Chicago Department of Public Health, the Network, and Heartland Alliance, among others, to create and provide an innovative approach to serving not only the victims and children impacted by domestic violence, but also the persons who cause the harm, the perpetrators of the domestic violence. We know that intimate partner violence is increasing. You've heard from all of the speakers before me. We know that the pandemic has contributed to some of this, the stress of being quarantined, of losing jobs, the feeling of hopelessness and helplessness have, among other things, contributed to this rise. It's also contributed to the rise in the street violence. Since the pandemic started, Metropolitan has seen a 26% increase in the number of people calling in Chicago and Cook County seeking help for domestic violence services. Those are just the people seeking help. We're certain that the actual incidence of domestic violence is significantly higher. This innovative approach to serving the perpetrators of intimate partner violence understands that hurt people hurt people. It recognizes the intersectionality with the street violence. According to Vaughn Bryant, who's the Executive Director of Communities Partnering for Peace, a collaborative effort with the Mayor's Office, the Department of Public Health, and many others to interrupt the street violence and address its underlying causes. He says, in the community violence field, we have long known that intimate partner conflict, even if it doesn't rise to the level of domestic violence, can lead to community violence. In a Bloomberg study, which was cited in the Mayor's strategic plan, of 749 mass shootings, found that 60% of them were perpetrated by men with a recorded history of domestic violence. Now, I want you to hear what I said, recorded history. Since we know that domestic violence is significantly underreported, the percentage is likely even higher. In Mayor Lightfoot's citywide strategic plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking, Erica talked about the goals. One of those is to develop the citywide ecosystem that adequately prevents and responds and intervenes to address gender-based violence in a trauma-informed and culturally specific way. The new collaborative approach that Mayor Lightfoot and the Department of Public Health envisioned will work with us and many others to implement its different than usual services for the persons who cause harm. The typical services for those persons are often they're arrested, they're court-ordered, they go into a service. While those services have their place in this ecosystem, we're trying to create other services because there are many barriers for the perpetrators and the victims to actually make use of the services. This new approach will be led by Metropolitan's Oswaldo Caballero. He's a licensed clinical social worker with many years of experience in serving the persons who cause harm and their victims. This new approach will seek to change the narrative about those who cause harm. After reviewing much literature about non-traditional programs, Metropolitan is building a curriculum that will help folks understand the impact of trauma on all of us, how it shows up in our families and individuals and communities. We will think together about how society's teachings about gender impact men and women and how causing harm can be a part of this. It will address the societal messages about what it means to be a man and what happens when one doesn't fit those stereotypes. This curriculum will help persons who cause harm to understand violence in their community and homes, and it will lay the groundwork for the healing process. The program will start on March 1st with community education sessions, public service announcements, and outreach through the natural community systems, such as faith-based institutions, street outreach organization, job training providers, schools, and many others. It will focus initially on the communities of South Chicago, Englewood, West Englewood, and Chicago Lawn, with the hope that if we do this right, we can expand this across the city. We want to reach the perpetrators who often fall through the cracks. We won't be calling the police. We want to build a safe and trusting space for these persons to learn, to heal, and to make amends. We will do this all in the context of keeping the victims of this interpersonal violence safe. There will be individual clinical support, community-based healing circles, connection to a variety of wraparound services for both the perpetrator and the victims and children. We recognize that this will be a very new approach. It's going to be really hard. We will be learning and evaluating throughout the process. We commend the city for not only wanting to start these services, but for wanting to evaluate them, and the process for standing these services up and the larger impact it has on families and communities, the changing the narrative piece. We look forward to working with our partners at Heartland Alliance. They will be doing the evaluation component. All of us working together, seeing the persons who cause harm through the lens of trauma, we believe can help these persons and their victims heal and break this cycle. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm going to turn it back to Alderman Laspaza.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you to all of our speakers today. I regret that Christina Rodriguez from the Youth Council doing this work can't be with us, but I will share with you briefly. As I was walking home on Friday, my wife, I was telling her about this event, and she asked me, how did this become so important to me? And I will share with you 3 60-second stories of breaking silence. One was 20 years ago when my mom was driving me to the library in the town that I grew up, and out of nowhere, she pours out this story to me, a story of being sexually assaulted by her brothers, of being physically assaulted by her alcoholic parents, her attempts to escape from this situation being thwarted by my grandfather, and then dropped me off at the library. And I was left with all of this pain and trauma and confusion to try to understand. But I feel like that was a moment of my mom breaking this silence of trauma. And I remember 3 years ago being here with you, Mayor, and you, Commissioner, in this building, visiting the network and the hotline downstairs, and being told that you were the first mayor to visit the hotline, to see that work, to speak to their youth. And my goodness, what a silence you broke that day of previous administrations. And I remember just 10 weeks ago being at the 14th District Police Headquarters for their Tree of Hope event, as we stood there with the daughter of Veronica Rizzo. And Veronica Rizzo was shot and killed by her husband in 2014. And you could see how deep the trauma and the pain of that loss still was for her daughter. And I remember we talked about that as a tree of hope, this purple lit up tree, but it felt like a tree of grief and of mourning for all of us there. This is the hope that I look forward to, a hope of breaking a silence in a city of violence and trauma, in a country and culture of violence and trauma, where we say no more. And we recognize that this is a hard, long road to go down, but it is a road worth walking as we try to make a safer life and hopefully a city in the future free of gender-based and domestic violence. Thank you so much. And Mayor, I turn the podium over to you for questions and answers.
And thank you, Alderman Laspada, for sharing your own personal experience and why this issue is so important to you. Cesar?
Thanks a lot, Mayor. Appreciate that. Members of the media, Alejandra and I will pass down the mic for the Q&A. 2 questions per reporters. Please keep your mask on while asking the question. Alejandra, we'll start off with Mr. Delamore. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. First, I want to ask about the topic here. And when Ms. Pyron talked about the wait for some services, for some providers, so that raises the question, when people are ready to make that call and have the courage to make that call, maybe the call will be answered, but are the services available for people?
Well, I think the investments that we have committed to making over this year, and I expect them to continue in the out years as well, has to answer that call, because you're right. And I was talking about this yesterday with someone. When people get to the point where they want to reach out, we have to be ready. We have to be ready to take their hand. We have to be ready to guide them. We have to be ready to provide them with whatever it is that they need, whether it's housing, whether it's counseling, whether it's a ride away, whatever it is, we have to make sure that those comprehensive services are there, because that window, once it opens, can close as quickly as well. So that's what these investments are about, is making sure that we're breaking down these silos, that we're working collaboratively together, so that when that call does come, we answer in a definitive way, in a fulsome way, to help these folks that are in great need.
Well, let me just follow up on that then. Are we falling short now? And by how much?
Well, I can't quantify that for you, but look, we know that domestic violence is always a grossly underreported crime. We just know that. So I think that our challenge is not only to provide the kind of services that I mentioned when that call for help comes, but to also continue our education, our education amongst ourselves, providers, so that we can, when we see a problem, we know how to address it, but also the education of the people who are experiencing domestic or gender-based violence, so they have the courage to be able to step out on faith to get themselves the first steps out of a dangerous situation.
Heather Sharon, WTTW.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi there.
An off-topic question for you. Have you seen the latest COVID-19 data? Is the city on track to lift the mask mandate and the vaccine mandate as of February 28th?
Well, February 28th is obviously the date that the state set. That's not the date that the city set. We are making tremendous progress and kind of climbing down the back slope of the Omicron surge. Probably now for the last 3 weeks, we've seen week after week about a 50% or more decline in cases, which is great progress. We're still, though, at 500 cases a day, not where we want to be. We're still seeing too many people dying every day from COVID. So I think we're making great progress. Dr. Artie and I will have more to say on that later this week, but I don't want to put an artificial date on when this is going to happen when we still see some danger signs in the data. We're using the same set of data and metrics that we've used throughout the pandemic. We're making progress, but we're not there yet.
And if I can follow up,
Sure.
Dr. Arwady has presented a significant amount of evidence that shows the vaccine mandate increased vaccinations since it was imposed. Why lift it in the coming weeks if that has been an effective tool in encouraging people to get vaccinated?
Well, look, it's all about balance. And we've heard a lot from the folks who are most affected, particularly those businesses, about what their challenges are in enforcing the vaccine mandate, but also the impact on their businesses. But again, we're always going to be guided by the science and the data. And that's why I said, I don't want to put an artificial date on it. We're trending in the right direction. We have some expectations about what we may be able to do if we keep moving in the right direction, but we're not there yet.
Thanks, Mayor. Amy Jacobson, 560.
This
Amy.
is a follow-up to the vaccination passports. If and when we do drop them, whether it's this month or next month, are city employees still going to be required to be vaccinated? Because there's a number of firefighters, EMTs, police officers who are not going to get vaccinated and they're going to lose their job. Is there any way you could reverse that?
That's not going to change.
And why not?
We gave people notice in August that this was critically important. Having a safe workplace is something that I think we have an obligation to do. And my expectation is that people will have complied with the mandate. We've given ample opportunities for them to be in compliance. We've worked with them. We tried to meet them where they are. But yes, there are some people who have decided that they'd rather not be a city employee rather than get vaccinated. And that's their choice. But City of Chicago employees will be vaccinated.
Okay, a number of CPS parents thought you made a backdoor deal with the CTU.
I'm sorry, say.
Oh, a number of CTU parents thought you made a backdoor deal with the CTU when it comes to masking, quarantining, testing, because that collective bargaining agreement is in effect until August of 2022. Why do you think it was fair to collectively bargain on behalf of a third party without asking the students or parents for input?
Well, there's a number of factual errors that I'll push back
Okay,
in
that's fine.
your statement. Number one, we always engage with parents and students, always. And we've done that throughout the pandemic, and I think, frankly, we've gotten a lot better about it. And one of the things that I'm most pleased to see arising through this pandemic is a heightened level of parent engagement. Not only just CPS with parents, but parents who are advocating on behalf of themselves and their students. And I don't think we've seen this level of parent activism really in recent times in our city. So they are not, and rightfully so, quiet about what they want to get done and get accomplished. So the notion that somehow we did this in a backroom deal without them being involved, that's just not correct and really, I think, belies the facts. But the deal that I think you're talking about, which is the most recent deal that we struck with CTU to end their illegal strike, yeah, we wanted to make sure that we got past the school year and summer school. So that's why the August date is there. But
I mean, I'm a parent. I've been there 14 years, and I'm pretty in tune. We didn't get any information about that until it was revealed after the Thomas DeVore lawsuit.
Well, what I can tell you is what I know when I observed myself is that there was a level of engagement with parents around these issues, and parents were not silent. My inbox was flooded with emails and letters from parents about what they wanted to see happen. There were parent organizations that were on social media advocating for a range of different things. So I'm not sure why you didn't get a letter. I know you're a CPS parent, but we certainly were doing everything that we could to listen and to engage and make sure that ultimately what we were doing fundamentally was in the best interest of parents and students.
Jewel from WGN.
Hi, Mayor. Good
Hi
afternoon.
there, how are you?
Hi. So I know that the city is involved in the 40 acres fresh market coming to the west side, but I wanted to ask specifically, is there anything in the immediate future that the city is doing to help residents in West Garfield Park who lost the Save-A-Lot several weeks ago?
Yeah, I'm hearing about this loss. Look, you know as well as I do that unfortunately there are way too many food deserts all across our city. That's why we now have somebody in the mayor's office with the support of the Greater Chicago Food Depository who focuses on food instability across our city. But fundamentally what we need to do, and I'm in conversation on a regular basis with grocery stores, is we need to get new grocery store options in areas of the city, West Garfield Park being one of them, Alkel Gardens being another. Just had a conversation about that recently. We have too many areas where you don't have access to a full-service grocery store so people can get access to food that they need. And we've got to do everything we can to whittle that away, and we're working diligently on it. It's a big priority for us. Coming out of the pandemic, we saw in community after community, the biggest issue was not the virus, but food instability. That's what led to us standing up a full-time person in the mayor's office who's been now on the job for some time to make sure that we're coordinating our efforts across the city, that we understand where the gaps are, and then help me, frankly, apply the pressure to the grocery stores to say, you got to step up. We're not going to keep allowing, and I just had this conversation with a company in the last 10 days, we're not going to keep allowing people to go to the lucrative market on the north side and then they ignore other parts of the city that are desperately in need of good, cost-effective food options.
So are there any specific prospects for the West Garfield area, specifically that area where there's people who don't necessarily have vehicles and may not be able to get on the CTA? I mean,
Yeah, look, I don't want to get ahead of our negotiations, but the other thing I'll say is, particularly those who have SNAP benefits, because of the work that we did through the pandemic, now you can use your SNAP benefits to actually order groceries online, and that's new within the last 18 months. But we continue to work with all the stakeholders in West Garfield Park. I'm in that area personally, probably about once a week. We've invested literally tens of millions of dollars to really change the fortune and trajectory of West Garfield Park, and we understand that there's a great need for a grocery store there, and we're working on it.
All right, thanks a lot, Mayor. It's a wrap. Appreciate it.
Thank you.